Jumping is the bread and butter of the Mario series. It's not just how you get around, it's also used in combat. But how has jumping evolved across the mainline Mario games? I wanted to find this out, so I analysed every single game looking at the level design and the mechanics to figure out one question. What's the fewest number of jumps needed to complete each level or grab every collectible? Before we dive in, let's define what exactly a jump is. Sounds simple, right? But Mario games are packed with subtle mechanics, so it's worth being precise. To me, a jump is at any time the player presses a button that causes Mario to move upwards. That means the swimming in Super Mario Bros. Counts every time you press the A button, tilting back when you're using the Super Cape counts, hovering with Flood counts, but actions outside of the player's control, like bouncing off enemies or landing on spring pads, don't count. On the flip side, bouncing off Cappy does count, since the player initiates it. So, I'll run through the games in chronological order, noting some of the interesting points with each game. Let's start with the big dog, Super Mario Bros. There's not much complexity here, just springs and swimming to consider. There are 32 levels in total, but thanks to warp pipes, only 8 are required to beat the game. At the end of a stage in Super Mario Bros., you have to jump once to grab the flag, which means there are 32 jumps here that are down purely to the flag. That gives us 116 mandatory jumps, averaging 14.5 jumps per level. But if we measured every level, it takes 507 jumps with an average of 15.8 jumps per level. This will give us a good baseline. Water levels like 2-2 and 7-2 top the charts with 35 jumps each. They mirror each other's layout and are packed with swim-based movement. Constant A presses to move around the obstacles, so it makes sense that these are the most dense in jumps. And water levels will become a recurring feature. The lowest jump count will be level 1-2, since you can run across the ceiling and skip most of the platforming. Just 6 jumps required. Before moving on, let's look at Super Mario Bros. And the Lost Levels. There are very few differences in the stats. The big difference here is it's mandatory to play 12 of the levels now at the warps. More mandatory jumps of 193 at 16.1 on average as a result, with the total jumps being 566 and an average of 17.7, which is an increase from Super Mario Bros., but not all that much due to the similar style of the game. Now let's look at Super Mario Bros. 2. Now, this one's a whole different beast. With character selection, Peach is the obvious choice. Her floating ability saves tons of jumps. Combat also changes things. You need to pick up and throw objects, which requires you to jump on them first. There are 20 levels total, but only 10 are mandatory with warps. There were 25 mandatory jumps per level on average, the second highest in the series. Across all levels, they averaged 26.75 jumps per level, the highest in the entire series. There were also no water levels here.
Game of the Augustus Super Mario Brothers 2. Super Mario Brothers 2, you bitch.
Which makes the jump count even more impressive. This is pure platforming. And instead of just jumping on an axe, this is where boss fights actually become interesting. In total, you'll need 39 jumps for every Birdo, 32 for the world end bosses, and 6 to defeat Wart. That's 80 jumps total for combat. 13.8% of all jumps in the game, the highest combat to jump ratio in the entire series. Now let's move on to the famous game from the wizard, Super Mario Bros. 3. This game introduces new mechanics that affect jumping. The Tanuki Leaf power-up lets you fly after building up enough speed and repeatedly press the button to float. Each press counts here. You can bounce higher off enemies by timing your button presses, which also counts as a jump. You can stockpile items from toad houses, meaning that in theory you can always have the power-up you'll need. To reach the end with minimum effort, you need to beat 11 mandatory levels while using the warp whistles. Yes, those 3 hands are technically possible to avoid. I've seen the Summoning Salt video. With most of the jumps coming from the tank levels in World 8 and Bowser's Castle, each with over 20 jumps and being the feared auto-scroll levels, where I consider any platform that moves on its own or level that moves on its own, and you must move to keep up with it, as an auto-scroll level. The maze-like levels like 7-1, 7-6 and Bowser's Castle need the most jumps and require 26 to 27 jumps each. Water levels average 19.2 jumps, lower than the original game, thanks to Tanuki Leaf shortcuts and the frog suit, but still a big increase from the average. There's a clear upward trend. As the worlds get harder, the jump count rises. World 1 averages 9.4 jumps per level, while World 8 climbs to 14.5. That's a smooth difficulty curve reflected in the amount of jumps that you need. When you update some hardware, you need an updated Mario game with updated mechanics. And Super Mario World is no different. It has a cape feather. Every upward tilt I counted as a jump. There's also the P balloon upgrade, which is tricky to measure, so I counted every time you dodge a mid-air obstacle as a jump. Despite these quirks, Super Mario World is a much tighter platformer than its NES predecessors. More refined mechanics, a greater number of power-ups, and cleverer ways to avoid jumping altogether. To reach Bowser, you need to beat 12 mandatory levels. Across all 73 levels, Soda Lake and Forest of Illusion 2 top the charts with 51 and 41 jumps, respectively, both being water levels. Imagine my shock. The 7 major water levels in the game average 25.9 jumps each, higher than Super Mario Bros. 3, but still behind the original Super Mario Bros. Moving on to the first portable Mario game, Super Mario Land, with a far less powerful system, it had to reduce the amount of complexity in its mechanics. And so, you only have 12 levels in this game, which all are mandatory with no warps and no optional paths. 2 of these levels happen to be shmups for some reason, and so I counted every time you raised the ship as a jump. The platforming levels range from 19 to 36 jumps, with 4-1 and 4-2 maxing out. The shmup levels 2-3 and 4-3 have 6 and 11 raises, lowering the average, but if you removed them, the average jumps per level would jump up to 26.5. Interestingly, in this game there are 0 water levels as well. This and Super Mario Bros. 2 are just pure platforming games.
Oh, it's still the king! Still the king after all these years!
There isn't much more to note here, and so let's move on to the second handheld Mario game, Super Mario Land 2, the 6 golden coins. 72% of the game's levels are mandatory, second only to Super Mario Land in terms of percentage. As expected, some of the levels with the highest jump density are the 3 turtle water levels, averaging about 40 jumps each. Also, there are some areas that aren't exactly water levels but have goo-filled areas. These sort of operate like water levels and definitely increase the jump count in these parts. But there is one level here that holds the current record for the most jumps in one level, and that is Wario's Castle, with 57 jumps, a pure platforming gauntlet. Now let's move on to Mario 64. A leap to 3D changes everything. Mario now has wall jumps, triple jumps, side flips, and plenty of subtle movement changes. It's worth noting that swimming works differently. Your movement is dictated by the way you press the control stick, not the jump button. So I counted every time you move upwards as a jump, which greatly affected the jump totals in the water levels, as you'd expect. In total, you need 70 stars and 3 Bowser fights to finish the game. Jumping into paintings to enter worlds counts as a jump. There are coin stars from collecting 100 coins in every level, but they don't boot you out the painting after collecting, so you need to do this alongside a level. Combat includes kicks and punches, which don't require jumping, which makes some boss fights far more jump sparse. 388 mandatory jumps, just averaging 5.4 per level, the lowest so far by quite a distance. 929 total jumps across all levels, averaging 7.7. The updated mechanics and more open-ended levels mean the average jumps reduce significantly. Tick-Tock Clock and Rainbow Ride are mostly avoided in the mandatory runs due to the high jump counts. 12 and 13 jumps minimum per star. I need a word for the most jumps, and so I'm just going to use the word bountiful. I hope that sort of makes sense. The most bountiful level is Bowser in the Sky, which has 40 jumps, fitting as it's a classic obstacle course style Mario level. Water worlds like Jolly Roger Bay and Dire Dire Docks average just 2.7 and 4.9 jumps for each star, far lower than the previous games due to this previously mentioned change in swimming mechanics. Cool Mountain deserves a shout out as well, with just 1.9 jumps per star, thanks in part to the slides starting at the top of the level to fall down and clever warps. Now, Super Mario Sunshine builds on Super Mario 64 with Flood, adding new movement and attack options. Just like before, you need to jump to grab shine sprites and also jump to enter different worlds. But now we also have blue coins scattered around each world. If you collect 10 of them, you can earn a shine sprite. But since they're often tucked away in hard to reach corners, they increase the jump count. To beat the game, you must collect the 7th shine, Shadow Mario, in each world, and then defeat Bowser in Mount Corona. You can glitch a few levels to grab later on shines, but I do this without glitches. The only level you can actually avoid is Bianco Hills 1, as you can go straight to PT Piranha to trigger the fight for the 2nd shine sprite. So you only need to beat 50 levels compared to the 62 of Mario 64. And since you absolutely have to collect most of these shines up until the 7th one in each world, there are some worlds which you can't avoid, such as Serena Beach 2, which alone requires 27 jumps. Small things to note, there are 9 levels in which you enter and Flood gets taken away from you, and you have to do obstacle courses as standard Mario. These 9 levels count for 151 jumps, or 17.1 per level, which is nearly double the normal average. The water levels are surprisingly easy. Most start at the surface and the hover nozzle helps you descend. Even cleaning the eel's teeth surprisingly only takes 2 shots of the hover nozzle. The 4 underwater levels in total require 17 jumps, which is 4.25 per level. The 2 worlds that stand out in terms of average jumps are Mount Corona, which has 2 shine sprites averaging 18.5, makes sense as it's the end stage, and Delfino Airstrip has 2 shine sprites but averages just 3.5 jumps, which also makes sense as it's the first stage. Noki Bay is the jump king here, 171 jumps in total, averaging 12.2 per level, all thanks to relentless wall jumping. Moving on to New Super Mario Bros. The classic 2D platformer is given a fresh coat of paint, and some mechanics are carried over from the 3D games. To beat the game, you warp from World 1 to World 5 and then to World 8 to face Bowser, making for 19 mandatory levels. That's 506 mandatory jumps and averaging 26.6 jumps per mandatory level, the highest of any game in the series. What are the biggest contributors? Well, it would be the water levels in 8-2 and 8-3, with 70 and 114 jumps respectively. In fact, 8-3 is the 2nd most jump-heavy level in the entire Mario series. Gotta love water levels. If you remove those 2 water levels, the average drops dramatically to 18.9 jumps per mandatory level. And if you look across all 80 levels in total, water levels, again, the main culprit. 8 of them contribute 410 jumps, averaging 51.25 jumps each. And yet, despite having 20 fewer levels than Mario Sunshine, New Super Mario Bros. Packs in more jumping. That's a serious leap in platforming density. The other 3 New Super Mario Bros. Titles I thought to look at all together as they share the same DNA. All have similar averages and totals to New Super Mario Bros., with only New Super Mario Bros. U managing to have more than New Super Mario Bros. Water levels remain jump heavy, averaging 40.4 across 10 levels. New Super Mario Bros. U features a boss fight with Bowser Jr. in a water level after an auto-scroll level, which requires 40 jumps very specifically for the boss. And touching upon that level, that gives us an insight into why specifically New Super Mario Bros. U has more jumps than New Super Mario Bros., considering it only has 2 more levels. And that's because of auto-scroll levels, which increase from 5 in New Super Mario Bros. To 14 in New Super Mario Bros. U in some capacity. Less freedom to approach the stage, which means more jumping. No level in these 3 New Super Mario Bros. Games even comes close to 8-3 in New Super Mario Bros. The closest contenders are New Super Mario Bros. 2's S-6 for 80 jumps and New Super Mario Bros. U for 1-S in 90 jumps. Returning back to 3D games, we have Super Mario Galaxy. Mario Galaxy was a bit more of a challenge to analyse. With wild gravity and shortcuts galore, I focused on the intended path through each level. I also separated launch stars, sling pods and pull stars from regular jumps to keep things clear, and I noted them as star jumps. You need 60 stars to reach Bowser's Galaxy Reactor. Mandatory jumps are at 503, with star jumps at 178. That's 11.2 jumps per star, or 8.2 if you exclude the star jumps. Then if you look across all levels, there's 1,728 regular jumps and 549 star jumps, which is 2,277 in total. Once again, the new highest total. And that's 18.8 jumps per level, or 14.3 without star jumps. The level to note here is Sea Slide Galaxy's Purple Coin Challenge, which has 103 jumps, which is the most bountiful level yet in a 3D game. Small little thing here, you could technically also count Luigi's 120 extra stars, which would double the total overall, but they are just remixes of the earlier levels that mainly kept the same jumps, so I'm just sticking this analysis to Mario's run, but note that the Galaxy games could quite easily just double their numbers and be the highest. Which brings me on to Super Mario Galaxy 2, which basically builds upon everything the predecessor does with more stars and more refined level design. Whereas Mario Galaxy 1 has 178 mandatory star jumps and 549 total star jumps, Mario Galaxy 2 has 134 mandatory star jumps, fairly similar to Mario Galaxy 1, but only 232 total star jumps. This certainly has an impact on the total figure, bringing it below Super Mario Galaxy 1's total jumps. The two standout galaxies here are Flip Out Galaxy, which has a lot of wall jumps, and the Grand Master Galaxy stars, which is once again the endgame gauntlet. Another factor will definitely come in is the fact that some of the stars in Super Mario Galaxy 2 are minigame stars you can access from early on in the level, which don't require mini jumps at all. Now moving on to Mario 3D Land and 3D World. These games blur the line between 2D and 3D. Their obstacle course level design feels more like classic side-scrollers than the open world exploration. Mechanically, there are not many changes in how jumps work. Swimming, though, behaves like the 2D games, and the power-ups like Tanuki Leaf and Cat Bell let you float to reduce the jump counts. In 3D Land, to reach Bowser, you'll need to beat 35 levels. The two standout levels here are the final Bowser level in World 8, which makes sense as it's a long platforming segment for the Bowser fight, and is part auto-scroll level. The other level being S8-S, which is the final gauntlet level. Mario 3D World continues the structure, but has 59 mandatory levels, the second highest among all 2D style Mario games. The standout levels with over 30 jumps are the expected ones, 8-C and 8-M, the End Castle and the End Mystery House, then also the same for C-Champion and C-M, for the special worlds End Gauntlet and End Mystery House. But the standout level with 61 jumps is 7-6, a water level. Goodness gracious me. Moving on to the latest 3D entry, Super Mario Odyssey, it breaks the mold. Instead of linear routes ending in a single star, you're collecting hundreds of moons scattered across vast open worlds. And you can walk freely to choose your own path to each of these moons, which removes a lot of the jumps that you might use otherwise. Also, this game finally removes the fact that you need to jump to enter into a level. There are 121 mandatory moons to beat the game, but you only need 116 unique ones due to the multi-moons. There are 16 worlds packed with 836 total moons, which means the mandatory jumps come to 363. This is because there are 70 of these 116 moons that only require one or fewer jumps to get. On average, there are 3.1 jumps per level, the lowest of any 3D Mario game. The total jumps, 4,072, is the highest of any Mario game. On average, 4.86 jumps per moon, the lowest average per collectible in the entire series. Since there aren't any specific missions that need to be followed in order for you to complete each level, you simply can collect whatever moons are available to you at the lowest count to power up the Odyssey and then go to the next level. You have to fight Bowser in certain missions, and then that's it. That's how you can beat the whole game. There are 21 auto-scrolling platform levels, but none are required to beat the game. It's the most auto-scrolling parts of any of the Mario games, but this does come from the fact that there's 836 total moons. Seaside and Lake Kingdoms have 113 moons combined, but only one moon, Sea Gardening Ocean Trench Seed, requires traditional swimming without transforming into something like a Cheep Cheep. It takes 46 jumps, by the way. So even though technically Odyssey has the most water levels in any Mario game, in reality very few of these moons require swimming, and thus it doesn't feel right to include it in the graphs, as it wouldn't tell the true story. Mario Odyssey has the highest jump count of any level, which is the Long Journey's End at 117 jumps. There's also a moon, which has 100 jumps, which is the Jump Rope Moon. 174 moons require 0 jumps, which is 21% of the total. 61 of those are from Toadette achievements, and 11 are from buying them from shops. There are also a bunch more for just talking to NPCs, little mini-games, or quizzes. Also, there are 26 bosses in Mario Odyssey, the most of any Mario game, and 171 jumps in total are needed for the bosses, the most once more. Another small bit of fun analysis for you. If you take the total jumps needed to finish a level, so grabbing the flag, the slot box, or a star, then Mario Odyssey needs 508 jumps just to grab moons. 12.48 of all total jumps in Mario Odyssey come from grabbing the moon at the end, which is nearly double the next one, Mario 64's 64 jumps, lovely, at 6.89% of the total jumps. And finally, onto the latest entry in the series, the return to 2D platforming, Super Mario Wonder. There are two things here to note. Wonder Seeds, they change exactly how the level operates. There's a lot more variance with how you tackle each area and whether or not you need to do a lot of jumps. And you can equip badges which change how you approach the level. Often, the high jump or the jet run badge are used in order to skip a lot of small obstacles and reduce the amount of jumps. There are 129 levels across 8 worlds, the most for any 2D Mario game. This includes badge missions, KO challenges, and search parties. And to beat the game, you need to collect 6 Royal Seeds and defeat Bowser, which has 62 mandatory levels, the highest of the 2D Mario games. The mandatory jumps are 1,144, the highest in the series. A level highlight will be S-10, which has 105 jumps. It makes sense, it's the final gauntlet level. And Bowser's Castle has 71 jumps, of which 27 of these come from fighting Bowser. Both of these levels feature in the top 10 most bountiful levels in all of Mario. It has the joint second highest number of water levels, excluding Odyssey. It has the third highest mandatory water levels, the third highest total auto-scroll levels, and the second highest mandatory auto-scroll levels. But weirdly, whereas Odyssey had the most bosses in the Mario series, Wonder only has 5 bosses. You fight Bowser Jr. 4 times, and then Bowser once, for 30 jumps in total, of which Bowser takes 27, which is 90% of the total jump count, which means the final boss is the highest percentage of jumps compared to all of the other games. Wait, I did tell a Porky earlier. There was one moon on Mario Odyssey that I neglected to mention and swept under the rug for dramatic effect. And that would be Mushroom Kingdom Moon 103 Jump, Jump, Jump. This requires Mario to jump a total of 10,000 times to get this moon from Toadette. And assuming this would be the final moon you pick up in 100%, that would mean it needs 5,928 jumps to collect it. That definitely makes it the highest amount of jumps needed for one thing and increases Mario Odyssey's total jump count to 10,000. I think it's probably useful to show with and without this moon's figure for the general vibe of the game, as 11.9 average jumps per moon really doesn't show the full story. Now let's put all these figures together and see the patterns. For mandatory jumps, Super Mario Wonder tops the charts for 1,144. The mandatory jumps has been steadily increasing since Super Mario Bros., with the second fewest mandatory jumps of 116. Super Mario World has the fewest mandatory jumps with 114 jumps, mainly due to the fact you have to do each of the Star Worlds. Super Mario Land has 100% of its jumps as mandatory, as you would expect, and Super Mario Land 2 is in second with 80.1% of jumps as mandatory. Super Mario Wonder comes in third with 48.9% of all of its jumps as mandatory. And then, as expected, Super Mario Odyssey is rock bottom with only 8.9% of total jumps as mandatory, if you don't include the 5,000 jump moon. Mario Odyssey, as you would expect, is top for total jumps with 4,072, and then 10,000 potentially. Super Mario Wonder is second with 2,339, which does show over time the games are growing in scope. Super Mario Land with the fewest levels and the fewest jumps of 282. Then if you look at the averages, look at the mandatory average jumps for each level or collectible, you can see that New Super Mario Bros. Is top with 26.6 per level, mainly because of the high amounts of jumps for each level and the aggressive water levels. Then Mario Odyssey comes rock bottom with 3.1 jumps. This makes sense, with the ease of grabbing some of the moons up to Bowser. Then if you look at the total averages, whilst they had the second highest mandatory jumps, Super Mario Bros. 2 has the highest average jumps for all levels at 26.8 per level. Adding in the jumps for combat and some of the very vertical levels, this makes sense. Mario Odyssey would once again be bottom for total average jumps, unless you include the 10,000 jump stat, which then means that Mario 64 would be the lowest with 7.7 jumps per star. I've already spoken about this before, but Odyssey has the highest amount of collectibles and Wonder has the most amount of levels in a traditional sense. Super Mario Land has the fewest, and then for mandatory levels it follows a similar format, but Mario 3D World has quite a high amount of mandatory levels with 59. It seems as time goes on, these games are getting stuffed with more and more content that you can't avoid. Looking at water levels, Mario Odyssey and Mario 64 have the most of them, but Mario Odysseys aren't really in the style of classic water levels, and with their 3D movement mechanics, they don't really give you much of an insight. So if you just look at the 2D games, this gives you more surprising views. As time has gone on, water levels are becoming more and more popular, peaking at Super Mario Wonder. Even though they are commonly complained about for slowing of the game pace, I believe Nintendo has done a decent job of mixing these levels up with power-ups, twists, or gameplay mechanics to make them more fun. Some of the early games don't have water levels like Super Mario Land or Super Mario Bros. 2, but it's probably how the games are programmed. In a similar way, auto-scroll levels have been getting more and more frequent as games go on, with Odyssey having the highest amount. But Super Mario Bros. 3 gets a shout out simply because of the airship levels and the multitude of auto-scroll levels in World 8. They also have the most mandatory auto-scroll levels with 12. As the games get more complex and deeper, there are more bosses for you to face. Odyssey peaks there at 26, as you have a variety of different things you can transform into which change how you fight bosses. The second lowest comes in at Super Mario Wonder, which is very curious, perhaps focusing on the platforming challenges more than combat. Outside of Mario Odyssey, New Super Mario Bros. U has the second highest jumps on bosses with 95. On the final boss, Mario 3D Land has the most jumps for Bowser in the platforming segment, with 33. There are 12 levels with over 70 jumps to complete or grab the collectible. New Super Mario Bros. Having the second highest with 8-3 for 114 jumps. Super Mario Odyssey's darker side being top with 117. In general, the 4 New Super Mario Bros. Games have 6 of the 12 highest jump totals. 4 of them are endgame gauntlets or Bowser levels, 1 of them is the jump rope minigame from Mario Odyssey, and that remaining level being Sea Slide Galaxy's purple coin star from Mario Galaxy. It just has a lot of jumps to get around the world to grab the coins. Also, I looked at the volatility of jumps, which is essentially just seeing how varied the jump counts are for each level compared to the overall average. You see that it is steadily increasing as time goes on, with more and more varied levels with different mechanics. Mario 64 being the most volatile and Super Mario Land being the most steady. I then looked at most of the worlds in each game to see if they have a nice progression curve. Most of the games do trend upwards as you reach the final levels, with Mario 3D World being a nice example, increasing steadily until World 8, and then the special worlds being a bit more strange and dipping. The 2 other standouts are Super Mario Bros. 2, which actually trends in the opposite direction, maybe as World 7 has 1 fewer level. New Super Mario Bros. U has its peak at World 5, mainly due to the fact of 5-ship and 5-5 being water levels and auto-scroll levels, taking up a lot of jumps. The later worlds just simply don't reach those heights. In the 3D games, Mario 64 has 6 stars that require 0 jumps. Mario Sunshine has each of the Shadow Mario levels for 7 shines to be grabbed without a jump. There's only 1 you can grab without a jump in Mario Galaxy 1, Deep Dark Galaxy 3, there are none you can get in Mario Galaxy 2, and finally, 173 in Super Mario Odyssey, as I mentioned before. Finally, what can we glean from all this data? Well, one thing's clear. Mario games are getting bigger. Odyssey and Wonder stand tall as the largest entries in their respective genres, 3D and 2D, and there's no sign of that momentum slowing down. But here's the twist. While the scope expands, the average jumps per level in both mandatory and total decrease. Why is this? Because the gameplay is evolving. Developers are mixing in new mechanics, traversal styles, and creative level designs that reduce the need for constant jumping, especially in the 3D games. In fact, 3D Mario titles now average significantly fewer jumps per collectible than their 2D counterparts. The 2D counterparts get many more variants per level, as Wonder is a great demonstration of this, but they have managed to be fairly consistent with the amount of jumps needed in each of the levels. Meanwhile, the days of warping past half the game are fading. Modern Mario games demand more mandatory levels to reach the end, encouraging players to explore and actually engage with the full experience, and making speedrunners' lives a little bit harder. Water levels, they're still here, but instead of slowing things down, they've been reimagined with faster and more fluid movement mechanics. And auto-scroll stages, once a rare novelty, are quietly on the rise, with developers finding clever ways to remix the concept and keep players on their toes. What does this tell us about the future of Mario? In the 2D space, expect more of what Wonder delivered. Tons of levels, constant mechanical variety, and playful reinventions of classic ideas. But in 3D, we've already seen the next step in Bowser's Fury, I believe. A truly connected world, not broken up by hub zones or level gates. A seamless, open map filled with dynamic challenges and collectibles. A Super Mario adventure.